The pen trembled slightly between my fingers as I signed the final page. My signature still firm, despite the quiet tremor in my bones, curved neatly across the dotted line. The notary, a polite man in a navy suit who smelled faintly of aftershave and ink, nodded and began organizing the paperwork. I glanced at Thatcher, expecting a word of thanks, maybe even a tired smile. Instead, he stood with his arms crossed, his jaw tight. "Thanks," he said flatly. "You can leave now. I don't need you anymore." The words fell from his mouth like gravel, sharp, heavy, final. My ears rang. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard, but the look in his eyes told me I hadn't. The notary looked up clearly, caught off guard. He blinked rapidly, then coughed into his fist, and quickly packed his briefcase, as if eager to flee the room. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, a sudden bloom of shame, of confusion. But my body stayed frozen. This was my living room. The couch still held the indent of my knitting basket. The walls wore the soft yellow paint Thatcher had chosen when he was 12, saying it looked like sunshine. I had bought this house with my late husband Royce after years of pinching every penny from his mechanic wages and my sewing jobs. Every corner, every floorboard held my life. And yet, I stood there like a guest who had overstayed. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," Thatcher added already, walking toward the kitchen. "You said it yourself. It's just a house." Just a house. I picked up my purse, the one with the frayed strap I hadn't bothered to fix. My fingers brushed the edge of the old doily on the entry table. I had crocheted that the winter he broke his arm sledding. I remembered keeping the lights on all night while he recovered, afraid he might need me. I opened the door. The March wind hit me hard. I turned once, expecting maybe a glance from him. There was none. The door clicked shut behind me. And just like that, I became a stranger in the place I called home. The wind tugged at my coat as I walked down Willow Avenue, the sidewalk familiar under my shoes, but suddenly foreign. I passed Mrs. Kessler's porch, her Easter wreath already out, pastel eggs dangling from plastic vines, and raised my hand instinctively. She waved back, cheerful as always. "Morning, Celia," she called, and I managed a nod. She didn't know I had nowhere to go. None of them did. My legs moved without direction, past the pharmacy where I used to pick up Royce's blood pressure pills, past the diner where Thatcher had once spilled chocolate milk, all over his spelling homework, crying, as if the world had ended. I had laughed, then wiped the table with napkins and told him it was just paper. We could start over. Now I understood how paper could destroy everything. The church bells chimed noon. I paused outside the bakery and stared at the frosted cakes in the window. Once every March, I baked Thatcher a banana cake from scratch. He used to sneak into the kitchen and lick the frosting bowl before it hit the sink. "Best birthday cake in Bramblewood," he'd say, with his mouth full. I haven't baked that cake in years. I passed more houses, more people. Some waved, some didn't. No one looked close enough to notice the difference. Maybe it was the coat still neat, still buttoned. Maybe it was the way I walked upright, still holding myself the way my mother taught me. Dignity. Even when you have nothing. By late afternoon, my feet ached. I ended up in front of the Greyhound terminal on Sycamore Street. I hadn't planned to go there, hadn't even realized where I was walking. But the glass doors slid open automatically as I approached, and inside was warm. Anonymous. A few travelers huddled by vending machines. One man was snoring on a bench with his coat pulled over his face. No one looked at me twice. I sat on the far side near the windows and stared out at the glowing lights of the gas station across the street. I could still feel the house key in my coat pocket, even though it no longer meant anything. The security guard paced by a few times, but didn't say a word. Maybe he thought I was waiting for a bus. Maybe he didn't care. Either way, I was invisible, and part of me found comfort in that. As night fell, I curled on the bench, my purse cradled in my arms like it might hold more than a pack of tissues, a coin purse and a phone that hadn't rung all day. I closed my eyes and let the quiet hum of fluorescent lights drown out the thoughts I couldn't stop. Somewhere just blocks away, Thatcher was probably turning off the same lights I'd left on every night for 30 years, and I was no longer someone to turn them back on. The cold had settled into my knees by morning. I woke to the low rattle of a vending machine being restocked and the scrape of mop water dragging across the tile floor. My neck ached from the awkward bend against the bench. I sat up slowly, rubbing my hands together, trying to shake the fog from my brain. I hadn't really slept, just drifted in and out while the night hummed around me. I was still adjusting my coat when I heard my name, Grandma. I looked up, and for a split second, I thought I was dreaming. Maribel stood near the ticket counter, a backpack slung over one shoulder, her brows pinched in confusion. She looked older than 16 in that moment. Her mouth set her eyes sharp. Her gaze swept over me, pausing at my wrinkled coat, my shoes still damp from the rain the night before. "Grandma," she said again, softer this time, already walking toward me. "What are you doing here?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came. My throat tightened. Shame pressed hot against my chest. She didn't wait for an answer. She knelt beside me, reached for my hand. Her fingers were warm. "You've been crying," she said quietly. "Were you here all night?" I nodded barely. I couldn't look her in the eye. Does Dad know I didn't respond? She already knew the answer. She sat beside me on the bench, still holding my hand like it was fragile. "Come stay with me," she said. "Please. My place isn't big, but it's warm and clean. You can have my bed." I shook my head. "I'm fine, Maribel. I don't want to." "You're not fine." Her voice cracked just barely. "And you're not a burden. You're the only real family I've ever had." The words hit something inside me that hadn't moved in years. I looked at her, then really looked. She had Royce's chin, my mother's nose and eyes that somehow held everything I once believed love should feel like. I nodded. She smiled just a little, then stood and slipped her arm around me, helping me to my feet like she'd done it 100 times. Her car was parked on the far side of the lot. It was small, older, the passenger door sticking before it closed fully. She started the engine and turned the heat all the way up. I leaned back, letting the warm air wash over my face, and watched the station disappear through the fogged-up window as we pulled away. It wasn't home, but it wasn't the street either. Maribel didn't press me for details that first night. She gave me a towel, let me shower, and left a clean set of her sweatpants and an old college hoodie on the bathroom sink. Everything smelled faintly of lavender. The couch in her living room sagged in the middle, but it was warm, and it was mine for the night. She made grilled cheese with tomato soup and didn't say a word when I barely touched mine. In the morning, she handed me a mug of coffee and sat beside me, legs crossed under her, like a child again. "I think we should talk to someone," she said, eyes steady. "A lawyer." I looked down at the rim of my cup, turning it slowly in my hands. "There's no point. He had me sign the deed." "It's done." Her voice softened. "There might be more to it than that. Just come with me, please." We drove to a law office on the edge of town, a converted brick bungalow with a faded sign, Fulton and Associates, Elder Advocacy and Estate Law. Inside, the walls were lined with books and photographs of aging clients shaking hands with a silver-haired man I recognized as Mr. Fulton. He was kind but direct. After Maribel explained the situation, he asked to see any documents we had. Of course we had nothing. Thatcher had taken them all. "No problem," Mr. Fulton said. "I'll pull the deed and related filings from the county recorder's office." He returned 10 minutes later with a slim folder and a creased forehead. "Mrs. Maddox," he said slowly, "not only did your son transfer the deed into his name, but he also filed a caregiver agreement, one stating, you owe him $70,000 in unpaid support and housing expenses. It's been notarized and attached to the property record." My breath caught. He pushed the folder toward me. "Is that your signature?" I stared at the page. It looked like mine. Same slope, same loop in the M, but it wasn't mine. I'd never seen that paper before in my life. My hand went to my mouth. I shook my head. No, I whispered. I never signed that. Maribel stood behind me, her hands gripping my shoulders. I could feel her pulse through her palms. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Mr. Fulton nodded. It's a common tactic. Makes it look like he provided long-term care and you're repaying a debt. We can fight it, but we'll need witnesses' documentation, anything that proves this transfer wasn't voluntary. Coercion cases are difficult, but not impossible. I felt the room tip sideways, my stomach turning on itself. He forged my name, I said, voice shaking. He didn't just take the house. He wrote me into debt for existing. My eyes burned and I pressed my knuckles to them hard. The tears came anyway. My body folded inward on the chair like I was shrinking into myself. Mr. Fulton passed me a box of tissues without a word. Maribel dropped into the seat next to mine and slid her hand into mine, gripping tight. She didn't say a word, but I felt something pass between us in that silence, something stronger than blood. I wiped my face and looked up, still trembling. If we fight this, what do I need to do? Mr. Fulton leaned forward and said, we start with the truth, then we find the people who saw it. And I knew exactly where I had to go first. The walk to Dottie Lang's house was short, but it felt like crossing a great distance between who I used to be and who I had to become now. Her porch still had the white wicker swing Royce helped her hang the summer before his stroke. I remembered sitting there once laughing over lemonade while our boys played in the yard. That was decades ago, before everything complicated itself beyond repair. I knocked softly. After a few moments, the door opened and there she was, slimmer, grayer, leaning slightly on a cane, but her face lit up when she saw me. Celia Maddox, she breathed. I was starting to wonder what happened to you. I stepped inside and the warmth of her home hit me like a quilt. She led me to the living room where a fire crackled in the hearth. The cushions still smelled faintly of cinnamon, just like they always had. I didn't know where to begin, so I didn't try to dress it up. Thatcher took the house, had me sign the deed, and then he made me leave. Dottie didn't blink. She sat back in her chair and nodded slowly, as if she had already known this would happen. I saw him yell at you last Christmas, she said. Right through the kitchen window, and the way he slammed the car door and peeled out that day. You wouldn't give him money for something. I knew something was wrong. Her voice was steady, but there was an edge to it I hadn't heard before. I always wondered how you kept so quiet, she continued. You were so proud of him even when he stopped visiting, even when he made you cancel your sewing group because he didn't like strangers in the house. My throat tightened. I hadn't realized how visible it all was, how loudly silence could speak. He isolated you, Celia, she said, leaning forward, little by little. And you let him. I thought I was helping, I said. I thought maybe it would pass. It didn't, she replied. But I can help now. I'll testify. So will Barb on the next block. And Mr. Klein. We all saw it, even if we didn't say anything then. Something shifted inside me. Not quite strength, but maybe the place where strength begins. Back at Maribel's apartment that evening, she handed me a leather-bound journal she picked up from the campus bookstore. Let's start writing it all down, she said. Dates, moments, things you remember. All of it. I opened the cover and stared at the first blank page. My hand hovered over it, unsure. Then I wrote, he started calling me her instead of Mom, the year Royce died. Maribel watched quietly from the kitchen table. I kept writing. One sentence, then another. The words came slow, but they came. By the time the sun dipped behind the rooftops, I had filled 3 pages, and I knew it was time to speak those words out loud. The courthouse smelled like old paper and lemon-scented polish. I sat beside Mr. Fulton at the plaintiff's table, my hands clenched in my lap. Maribel sat directly behind me, her presence steady and silent. I could feel her eyes on me the whole time, as if they alone were keeping me from sinking. Thatcher looked polished in his pressed suit and leather shoes. He didn't glance at me once. When he took the stand, he spoke with ease as though he were telling an old story he'd rehearsed 100 times. My mother's always had control issues, He began, his voice smooth. She's had a hard time letting me live my own life. The house she wanted me to take over said she trusted me. I didn't force anything. And as for the caregiver agreement, she was the one who brought it up. Said it made things cleaner for tax reasons. He paused, feigning emotion. I've supported her for years, paid her bills. She never appreciated it. This whole case, it's just punishment for leaving home and making a life of my own. The judge nodded, scribbling something on his legal pad. I took the stand next. My throat felt raw before I even spoke. I raised my son alone after my husband died, I said, my voice shaking. I worked 2 jobs. I gave up sleep, gave up everything so he wouldn't have to struggle. I signed the deed because he said it was just paperwork to help with a loan. I didn't know I was signing away my life. Mr. Fulton asked me to describe how Thatcher treated me in the final years, what he said, what he controlled, how he isolated me from friends, from myself. I stopped inviting people over because he said it embarrassed him, I said. He made me feel like I owed him for every meal I ate in my own kitchen. I didn't cry. I wanted to, but I didn't. Then Dottie Lang took the stand. Her cane tapped against the floor as she made her way up. We all saw it, she told the court. The yelling, the way he barked orders at her like she was a maid. She stopped coming to the quilting club, and when I asked why, she just looked down. Other neighbors followed Barb, Mr. Klein, even the mailman. Bit by bit, they built a picture of something I hadn't known was visible. The judge recessed for nearly an hour. When he returned, he looked tired, but certain. The deed transfer stands, he said, but the caregiver debt document shows troubling inconsistencies. Given testimony of coercion and the circumstantial evidence I'm ordering, restitution, Mr. Maddox will pay Ms. Maddox 50% of the home's assessed value and cover all legal costs. Thatcher stood stone-faced. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at Maribel. He picked up his coat, nodded once at his attorney, and walked out. I didn't feel victory. Not exactly. But I felt something else. Something close to space, to air returning, to room enough to begin again. It was just after sunset when the knock came. Soft at first, then louder, more urgent. Maribel was at the campus library, and I had been folding the last of the laundry when I heard it. Something in the rhythm of the knock made my hands freeze. I opened the door slowly. Thatcher stood there on the porch, shoulders hunched, eyes red and swollen. His clothes were wrinkled, and there was a wildness behind his expression I hadn't seen before. He looked like a man who'd run out of places to go. I lost everything, he said hoarsely. I need your help. The wind carried his voice through the narrow hall. For a moment I didn't say anything. I just looked at him. At the man I raised. At the man who had once clung to my leg when he was scared of thunder, who had called me from college when his heart was broken for the first time. At the same man who signed my name to a lie and locked me out of my own life. I didn't think it would go this far, he said. I don't know what I thought. You thought I would stay quiet, I said. Like always. His eyes welled up again, and he looked down at the welcome mat, as if he might find an answer in the fabric. I know I was wrong, he whispered, but I'm still your son. I felt the ache deep in my chest, but I didn't let it show. I stood straighter. You told me I didn't belong, I said. Now I finally do, just not with you. He looked up, startled. There was something like panic flickering across his face, but it didn't land where it used to. Not anymore. I closed the door gently. Not out of anger, out of peace. The apartment looked different by the end of that week. Not bigger still, the same cramped 2 rooms with the scuffed baseboards and the humming fridge that never stopped but warmer somehow. Maribel and I moved the couch to face the window. We bought 2 tomato plants from the farmer's market and set them in mismatched clay pots on the sill. The sun hit them just right in the morning, the way it used to in my old kitchen. Only this time, the light felt like it belonged to me. We hung a string of pictures on the wall above the dining table. Some of me and Roy, some of Maribel as a baby. One of all three of us from the 4th of July parade when she was 10, her face painted with glitter stars. My arm slung awkwardly over her shoulders, both of us squinting into the light. In that photo, she looked so much like her mother had at that age, but Maribel's eyes held something else, something that never looked away when things got hard. One evening, while she studied at the kitchen counter, I took out the journal she had given me and opened it to a fresh page. I sat quietly for a while, just listening to the sound of her pen tapping against her textbook and the faint hum of traffic outside the window. Then I began to write. I didn't lose my house. I shed it. What I kept was mine, my voice. I underlined those last 3 words, my voice. For most of my life, I hadn't known I was allowed to use it for myself. Maribel came over and read it silently. Then she wrapped her arms around me from behind her chin, resting gently on my shoulder. "You gave me a family," she said. "I'm just giving it back." I closed the journal and held her hands where they rested across my chest. My heart felt steady for the first time in months, not full, not light, but steady, like it knew where it lived now. Later, I stood at the window watching the last light of day fall across the tops of the buildings. The tomatoes glowed red against the glass like they'd been waiting to ripen until they knew they were safe. My reflection stared back at me from the window pane lined, soft-eyed, unhidden. I stood there until the sun dipped below the roofline, and for the first time in a long while I didn't feel like someone waiting to be seen.